Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay. I can't necessarily hear it myself, but thank you so much for joining me this morning. I'm super excited to be sharing with you what we're working on at the Unitary Fund, and hopefully make the case to you that collaborating with the open source community is a benefit to your company, your project, your research. So, where am I? It worked just a second ago. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so I wanted to start with a couple challenges that may resonate with you that I know I've had when I've been working on research and industry projects. So sometimes in quantum computing, we have pretty niche solutions or projects that we'd really like to have the time or resourcing to work on, but for whatever reason, we don't. And but it's something that more than literally just this one solution, like maybe you'd like to make it portable or something like that. Maybe you've struggled with finding the right talent for your projects. Obviously, historically, a lot of the folks that have been working in this field come from the academic side of things, have PhDs, but as everyone here probably knows, there's a lot of utility and need for folks with different backgrounds to start contributing and joining the quantum workforce. Or perhaps maybe you've worked on a project or tool where maybe it's open, maybe it's closed, but you'd like more people to use it, and it's basically just your team. This I think is a really huge problem, especially with open source projects. Down. So my case to you this morning is that I think the open source ecosystem can really address these kind of primary challenges that we have in quantum. So open source projects can address gaps in the ecosystem that maybe folks aren't incentivized to necessarily work on in a commercial sense. Open source training and skills really can help us build the quantum workforce. And the open source community can actually enable collaboration between academia, industry, nonprofits, and really actually get that engagement that will drive this technology forward. So who are we? The Unitary Fund is a nonprofit organization that really works to support the open quantum ecosystem. So in particular, we want that to benefit the most people. We're a fairly small team and kind of operate similar to a startup, but we have 3 full-time staff, about 5 or 6 part-time folks, and who are working on the variety of projects that we have. And we also have an advisory board that helps kind of review the microgrants we give out and help kind of steer the direction of projects that we're working on. And we really view the open source community more broadly as a critical part of our team. Just from the projects that we've worked on alone, there's over 60 micrograntees that have kind of come into this space in over 21 countries. So we're a globally distributed company. We literally don't have any physical headquarters, but it's been a really fun kind of experience to work on this team and actually bring together folks from all over the world. So how can we actually build quantum technologies together? If we want it to benefit everyone, probably everybody should be at the table. The thing is, we have a really good model for this. We see in classical computing, open source is obviously a really big thing there. You probably have open source in your pocket right now. Obviously, all of the AV stuff here has open source tools and projects involved. And a lot of times we think of what that is as literally the software projects themselves, which makes sense. So things like Ubuntu, the backing for a lot of the web, Android, all of these projects are really critical to our entire current technology ecosystem. But I think a piece that a lot of times people miss about this is that there's also a huge community around these projects that actually is what drives the success of them. Like, if it was just projects that had funding, these teams worked on them, I don't think it would really work as well. So the community around them is really things like the governance, the licensing, the community outreach. There's all of these other things that kind of come into what the open source ecosystem means. So we have a really unique opportunity here in quantum computing. We've pretty much been open source from the beginning. So I started my PhD in 2012, and even then, there were open source tools in Python that actually, I started doing my homework by hand and then realized that they exist, and I was like, oh, great, I don't have to calculate the quantum Fourier transform. I can use that function that's built in. So, early academic projects, a lot of those were open source, and as we saw the transition kind of into industry, and as a lot of people here in this room have products and projects that are actually open source. And I think that's a really cool opportunity that a lot of other fields don't necessarily have. Folks here actually value what open source can bring to their products, their research. And yeah, I think this is a really exciting opportunity moving forward for not only how can we leverage the literal software projects, but how can we activate and use this community that springs up around these projects to really drive quantum technologies forward. So what do we literally do at the Unitary Fund? We have two main things. We give out microgrants. So these are $4,000 US, no strings attached, no requirements of you must be this tall to apply. And we review them on a rolling basis. So that's kind of one of the main roles of our advisory board, that we kind of have a champion system. We look at all the applications. If someone on the advisory board kind of is really interested, they make the case to the rest of the board. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit in a moment about what kinds of projects we end up funding with that. But the other kind of main thing that we do here is we have our own research and development team. So that's primarily what my role here is. But yeah, being aware of what all the open source projects that are out there, knowing what all the industry partners are building in terms of software, like throughout the whole stack, we can really well see where there might be gaps or might be places where, for whatever reason, incentive structures don't motivate anyone else to build a tool or a project for that. And so we really see our role as being able to fill some of those gaps that really could benefit multiple people. So right now we're working on a couple different projects, and I'll go into those in a minute as well. But the other thing our research and development team does is we help support other open source projects as they grow, helping them scale, setting up governance, and setting up kind of figuring out a community engagement strategy. So Q2B has been kind of one of our pilot projects for that. You might ask, how do we, being a nonprofit, how do we actually do all of this? Well, a lot of it is brought to you by viewers like you. A lot of the folks here in this room help support us through donations. We also have some government grants for the research components. And when we're working on the research stuff, we also have a lot of collaborations with national labs, other universities and companies as well. So we really try to kind of be engaged all over the space, application side of things, hardware side of things, everything in between. So let's talk a little bit more about what these microgrants are, who we're giving them to, what does it look, what does the person who gets one of these microgrants look like? So $4,000 may seem pretty small to a lot of the folks in this room, but they can really actually have a huge impact. So actually, as of this morning, we've now given out 56 projects. We had our board meeting last night, and which translates to over $200,000 of money that we have just given away. And this really has translated to a lot of engagement, not only on like GitHub with these projects, we've had over 30 libraries developed. It also drives publications. So a lot of times someone who's applying has like a paper that they really would like to make a library or an open source tool for, or maybe they've already made it as a part of their PhD or part of a project and they want to be supported to open source it. So there's a lot of relationship between some of these microgrant projects and active research, which is really cool to see. Kind of going the other direction, some of the folks who receive these microgrants actually take what they build from the grant and actually spin it off into startups. So we've had 2 different startups kind of spin off from these microgrants. And even if they don't start a startup themselves directly, a lot of them are getting hired into the quantum workforce. So we've had over 12 12 of those 60 people actually get hired by, again, companies in this room and really kind of pivot their careers. A large percentage of the applicants to these grants don't come from quantum backgrounds. So they're people who have interest in quantum computing, they want to figure out how to get involved, and they see this as a kind of feasible on-ramp when maybe they don't necessarily want to go through like an academic program or don't have support from their employer to like dig into this stuff. So, and as I mentioned before, like we give them out all over the world, and yeah, which does make some financial logistics interesting. Yeah, and the grant process or the application process is like literally no more than 15 minutes. You basically fill out an abstract, what you want to do with the money, and a 2-minute video kind of just giving us your pitch for it. So of these, if we want to dig into who we've given these grants to, or what projects we've given these grants to, kind of one main bucket is probably what you would expect, open source software projects. There isn't a general bin that I could say that, mostly we have compiler projects or hardware interface projects. It really spans the entire space. We funded actually even some open hardware projects to build tools that help us with instrument control. But yeah, here's just kind of a small selection of these projects. We've got simulators, we got quantum networking, kind of modeling and simulation, circuit synthesis and layout. And the one down in the corner, Mythic, is one of the projects that we're working on. But these are really state-of-the-art projects that are getting used not only in the open source community, but in industry as well. So to do a little bit, addressing that's kind of first argument as to why you need open source, is that there are already niche tools that might address some of the problems that you're facing. So one good example of a microgrant project that kind of had non-trivial impact is PyZX. So this is a ZX calculus sort of tool for visualizing and creating circuit synthesis. And it's actually now integrated into the Qiskit transpiler. So this was quite successful and actually now is a pretty broadly used tool. But I don't think many people just off the cuff is like, yes, I would like a specific ZX calculus sort of package to solve my problem. You may not even know that ZX calculus is something useful, but yeah, it's kind of one of those where it is a fairly niche topic, but actually people can kind of pick up and use it and actually be enabled to do things that they wouldn't have otherwise. So thinking about the other kind of main bin of applications that we get and grants that we give out, we also support open education and open community sorts of projects. So this can be in the form, a lot of it's like open textbooks, where we're funding basically folks who are active researchers in those fields to keep basically documentation on what is state of the art up to date. So that's and encourage the community to kind of add contributions and really build up not only like text sorts of things, but actually build courses that people can go and use. One of my favorites is actually we funded a project that took fairy tales and combined them with quantum algorithms, and it actually worked pretty well. So that's the Quantum Tales book. But we also help fund and start other other community efforts in quantum computing. So you may have heard of like QWorld, which is based out of Eastern Europe. Qubit by Qubit, which is a huge like kind of curriculum teaching program that I think did their first year-long course with over 8,000 students. And Gate 42 is kind of another one of these local community sorts of things, building up curriculum in their native language or helping facilitate instructors who really want to get into this, really want to have this at their universities, but don't have kind of the support or resourcing locally to do that. So we really like, since we want to make quantum technologies that benefit everyone, these are also a critical part of our mission. And so kind of to that point, and the second point I made earlier, these efforts really help us build the quantum workforce. So I put up the pictures here of a couple of our Unitary Fund ambassadors. So these are folks who have made significant contributions to the quantum open source ecosystem and are kind of like our model citizens for what it looks like to be a successful, active contributor who's engaged in this space. And yeah, like it's been really, really cool to see how these folks' careers have developed. Pretty much all of them are, again, not from quantum computing originally. They're folks who are from other industries, whether it's mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, software devs. They're there, they have the skills that we need, and they just need a path. So showing them that kind of getting that first kind of portfolio, like personal portfolio development by working on open source projects has been a really, really successful sort of project. So that's kind of the primary way that we use the microgrants to help build the community. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about what we do in our internal research and development teams. So with as many projects that are kind of growing and building in this space, it is kind of helpful to have a good example that people can kind of see what it looks like to do best practice open source development sorts of things. So like I mentioned before, we try to find projects that are address niches or gaps in the ecosystem. So we've, in the last about 2 years now, been working on a project in Python called Mythic, which is an error mitigating compiler. So obviously doing the research on that, error mitigation is really nice because it allows you to use NISC hardware a little bit more effectively, but doesn't incur the overhead of full fault tolerance. So it's basically, you give us the circuit that you'd like to run, we'll add a little bit of overhead, throw in some classical stats, and try to give you a better estimate of what it would look like to measure or run that circuit without noise. So we have a couple different techniques implemented, and we take almost every major front end, run on almost every major back end, and a couple publications out about this if you want to learn more. But a big part of doing the development on Mythic is we want to show people what it looks like to be successful in developing quantum open source projects. So some of the things that we've done with Mythic that I think have turned out to be pretty successful are we've actually been doing, since January, all of our engineering meetings in public. So this is somewhat common in classical open source, but we have weekly sprint meetings with our engineering team. We do them on our Discord, and what we found is a lot of people, they came, they lurked, they didn't say much, just hung out. And after a couple times of seeing what it looks like to do quantum development, they're like, this is pretty close to what I do already. Maybe this is something I can actually do. And so over the course of this last year, we've gone from Mythic being something that basically our team developed and used. You obviously are direct collaborators on the academic research, but now we have over 30 active contributors to what is a relatively niche project that, has been really, really successful. It's what some of our ambassadors work on. And yeah, we've kind of thrown in, I think, 2 new techniques over the last year with this kind of additional help. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to kind of some new active research projects that are being created by the community, not even from us. So I really think this is a cool example of what it can look like when you get the open source community engaged with your projects and products. So the other thing that we've kind of done that I think has been really helpful here is we actually ran a hackathon this year, but it's kind of a little bit different than what you might think. There's no challenge that people were making projects for. We actually worked with maintainers on quantum open source projects to kind of identify what their biggest blockers were. So what were the issues that either they didn't have the skills to address or were just either too mundane or too difficult that they just didn't have the resourcing to address. So we worked with them to basically assign cash bounties to the issues that were blocking them. And then for the hackathon, basically gave everybody a list of this is what's blocking the community. come help. And we literally gave away almost every bounty we put out there. We had over 60 contributions to different projects, like, again, substantial contributions, not just typo fixes. Spun off a bunch of new projects where basically the discussion with the maintainer is like, yeah, okay, we could do this. It would actually, maybe this would make sense as a new library. And they actually just made a new library as a part of the hackathon. So this was really cool to see. We'll definitely be running another iteration next year, hopefully trying to scale it up. We had about 20 projects we were working with for this year. But what I hope this can kind of illustrate is engaging with the community writ large can really help benefit these projects, these open source projects. So what can the folks here do? What can you do to get engaged, participate in the open quantum ecosystem? Kind of based on what we've been talking about, you can engage that community and engage the folks in this community to work on your projects, your process, your products. A good way, maybe you want to start doing these community calls on our Discord. We actually, after about 6 months of doing that ourselves, Xanadu now is participating and doing their community calls for Penny Lane on our Discord. We have other open source projects like Q2B, and they've seen a pretty substantial uptick in participation on their repos. So you can find that at discord.unitary.fund. Discord, for the record, is basically like Slack, but with drop-in voice video channels, so in case you haven't seen it before. Another way you can get involved is either encourage folks that you know to apply for microgrants yourself, or suggest ideas to us for things that are like substantial blockers that maybe are these niche projects that you'd like to see people work on. We give out, like, generally the microgrants go to individuals or teams, but we've also given out microgrants to for-profit companies to open source parts of their products that maybe they don't have the resourcing to necessarily open source themselves. They want to, but again, resourcing. And kind of maybe a last way is to, if you're looking for people to hire, which I feel like most people here are, just taking a look at what's happening in the open source ecosystem. Like, you don't have to open source anything. You don't have to necessarily be engaging in these projects, but look at what people on these projects are doing. And you can most likely find people with the skills, especially non-quantum skills, that can really address your needs for your product. So let's actually make working in the quantum tech ecosystem welcoming and open for everyone. If you want to keep talking about this, I've got a booth literally just behind you here. Please stop by. We've got some fun swag. I'm an experimentalist by training, and I don't have a lab anymore, so I got a laser cutter in my house over quarantine, and I made all of our swag. So, but yeah, come chat about either getting demos from our team, having us kind of talk more about what it looks like to work in open source for, in your context. And if you're interested in supporting us financially or in kind, we have a corporate sponsorship sort of tier program, and folks can join our board and help provide input and direction for some of the stuff that we're working on. But yeah, thank you so much for listening, and enjoy breakfast.